Hey guys, it's Dr. J here. Hope everyone is having a phenomenal morning. Today we're going to do a live Q&A and we're going to talk about vegetarian proteins. Really great information coming by my desk. Wanted to bring it all to you guys in a condensed kind of clinical picture and what it means to you. So off the bat, we have proteins from animal sources for the most part, and we have proteins from vegetarian sources. Okay, the most common vegetarian sources of protein are going to be soy, which is going to be a phytoestrogen kind of protein as well. A lot of estrogens in there, not good for guys. Then we're going to have lentils, which are going to be legumes. It could be beans. It could be chickpeas. Then we have nuts and seeds, which could be either almonds, chia seeds, pumpkin seeds, etc. And then we're going to have quinoa as another potential option. And then outside of that, we have rice as well, and rice is typically combined with beans as well, as it's an incomplete amino acid source. And then we have various protein powders. So we have nuts, seeds, we have quinoa, we have legumes, which are lentils, chickpeas, beans, all fall into that family. We obviously have grains as well, which are not going to be a great protein source. We have quinoa and we have soy. Those are the big sources off the bat. You can do things like pea protein on the powder side, rice protein, hemp protein. These are protein powders. Now, when we look at a lot of vegetarian proteins, they're low in a couple of different amino acids that are very important for building muscle. Number one is the branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Also, alanine is another big one, and lysine are really big amino acids for muscle building, for glutathione. A lot of the more sulfur-rich amino acids, methionine, cysteine as well. These are all precursors to glutathione. So the big number one issue is we have certain amino acids that are part of our essential 8 amino acids that are missing. The big ones are methionine and lysine. You can get some of it and combine protein sources on the vegetarian side, like rice and beans, or adding in lentils in there and such, or adding in quinoa, and you can kind of get a blend of it. But you're going to see here, there's about some of the key branch chain aminos, some of the key amino acids I just mentioned. There's about a 4 or 5x difference when you compare the amino acid profile of animal products to a plant-based product. I'll do a video next week where we actually have all the graphs on screen so you guys can see it all and compare it. I think that's going to be really helpful to see. Number 2 is going to be the carbohydrate content in vegetarian proteins. To get that amount of protein, you need to have a lot of carbohydrate along with it. The big exception is if you start doing protein powders, or you add a whole bunch of soy protein. The problem with soy is there's a high amount of anti-nutrients, phytates, oxalates, as well as phytoestrogens, which are estrogen-like compounds, not good for guys. And of course, women who are estrogen dominant, which a lot of women are who have hormonal issues, estrogen dominance isn't good. So adding more soy onto that is going to be a big problem. Not to mention soy proteins are going to be the highest residue of pesticides and glyphosate out there out of all food. 90% of all if you look at most of all the products out there that are conventionally raised, from a broad spectrum agricultural model, are going to be your corn, your grains, and your soy. So not a great model for sustainability, okay? So I mentioned the carbohydrate portion. I mentioned just the missing amino acid portion. And then you also have to eat a lot. Okay, great podcast by Chris Kresser on Joe Rogan the other day, and he kind of broke down all of the different potential vegetarian options. So just one thing that I've done the model out on, and we'll do a video next week where I actually show you out on the screen what it looks like. The amount of protein in kale, for instance, if you were to take 8 ounces of meat, 8 ounces of grass-fed beef, you'd have to get the same amount of protein, you'd have to have 16 servings, 16 cups of kale. This is the problem with a lot of vegetarian protein sources. You have to eat a ridiculous amount to get would be a very small amount on the animal side, right? It's not unreasonable for someone to sit down and have an 8-ounce filet at a meal. That's not ridiculous. Maybe if you're a smaller person, but the average size person could probably put down an 8-ounce filet. You'd have to have 16 ounces of kale. Most people are not going to be able to do that. Even if you sauteed it up, you could probably get 2 or 3 cups down at once if you sauteed it up in some coconut oil so it wilted up a little bit. But the odds of getting 16 is not going to happen. So you have a lot more nutrient density where it's actually practically appropriate to get some of these foods down at a more meaningful level without having to, become a cow and literally have to sit there and eat all day. Now, you can do vegetable juice as well. Like I have celery juice, and I don't think it's an either or. I think you can look at, hey, let's combine some of the best nutrients. I look at plants as more of micronutrient support. I don't look at them as a good protein source. I really don't, because when you look at the amount of protein you're going to get in vegetable sources, data has shown it's about 0.8. It's about, I want to say it's a third. So 1/3 of a gram per pound of body weight. So if I'm 210 pounds, 220 pounds, 6'2", I'm probably going to be getting about 80 grams a day on the vegetarian diet. I'm trying to put on muscle. It's very easy on an animal-based diet if you just look at having a 4-ounce serving of protein 3 times a day. A 4-ounce serving or 4 to 5-ounce serving of protein at each meal, which isn't that hard, is going to be between 30 and 35 grams of protein easily. And that's just the protein source. If I do that 3 times a day, you're looking at easily about 120 grams right there. So automatically, I'm already at about 60% or 60% of my body weight in ounces of protein, or I should say grams of protein. So if I'm 200 pounds or 210 pounds and you multiply it by 0.6, you're looking at probably about 130 grams of protein if I'm about 210, 220. So about 130 grams. Not that hard to do it on animal-based products. Very hard to do it on plant-based products. And the guys who are competitive athletes, for the most part, they're going to be having to get extra protein from powdered protein sources. That's the only way to do it. That's the problem with a lot of animal protein sources. You have to go to the protein powders. So one of the arguments that, let's say, Joe Rogan had on the podcast that I found very interesting, he's like, well, you can do it. You can still get enough protein on a plant-based vegetarian diet. Yeah, you can, but you have to rely on a lot of supplementation and a lot of, processed powdered protein sources, which aren't necessarily a bad thing, but when 70% of your dietary protein is involving a powder source, that's a problem. And I kind of look at a diet that has to, let's just say, depends so heavily on powdered sources of protein means your diet's probably incomplete. Where I could easily get 200 grams of protein on a whole food animal source foods, it wouldn't be that hard at all. And maybe I could have a serving or two of protein powder in there and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So the fact that 80 or 90% of the foods that I eat can get me all the protein that I need tells you something. It shows you that your diet is more nutritionally dense. It's more nutritionally complete. If you have to go to outside supplementation for at least the macronutrients, I get it if you're using supplementation for micronutrients, right? Extra selenium or extra, let's say, magnesium. I get that, but let's say you're having to do it to fill the gap of what you're missing macronutrient-wise, meaning protein, fat, or carbs. That tells me that your diet's probably a little bit incomplete. So just the nutrient density and the completeness that you get in your macros without having to rely heavily on artificial, or I should say more processed protein sources, protein powders, tells me there's something incomplete about it. So those are the big 3 things. So having to rely heavily on protein powders to fill in the gap. Number 2, missing some of those key amino acids regarding the branched chain aminos, lysine, alanine, methionine, some of those really core sulfur-based amino acids. And the next thing is, if you are going to choose vegetarian sources of whole foods, right? Rice, beans, quinoa, lentils, you have to get a lot of carbohydrates. You're going to see your carbohydrate range to get that adequate level of protein will have to be around 60 to 70% of your of that will be carbohydrates. So if you get an adequate level of protein for yourself, let's say I want to get 150 grams of protein, I'm probably going to be getting 250 to 300 grams of carbohydrate along with it. And if someone's already insulin resistant or wants to rely more on ketones for fuel, it's going to be hard to be spitting out ketones and to be a fat burner if you're consuming 300 grams of carbohydrate without a lot of activity. So I hope that makes sense there off the bat. So I just want to compare animal versus vegetarian sources. Vegan sources. Now, as soon as you go vegetarian, that's a different argument. Because when you're vegetarian, you have access to eggs, and you have access to fish, and you have access to dairy. So it's a totally different argument because you're getting a lot of extra good, high-quality, fat-soluble vitamins from ghee or butter. And you're able to get, obviously, a lot of good proteins from eggs, about 6 to 7 grams of protein per egg. So if you're doing 6 eggs a day, you already got 36 to 40 grams of protein right there. And then if you're getting any fish in there, you're getting about 6 to 7 grams of protein per ounce of fish. So it's not that hard to do things pretty good on a vegetarian template. When you go vegetarian to vegan, it becomes a lot harder. A lot of times vegetarian and vegan are put in the same light and they're totally different. All right, let's see if I have any questions here off the bat, guys. Let's see. Give me 1 second to find out where y'all are hiding. All right, here we go. All right, to gain muscle mass, is it better to bulk and eat extreme caloric surplus or eat slightly above caloric intake every day? It depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to really put on a lot of mass and bulk and size, yeah, you want to, one, have enough protein. So my recommendation is 1 gram per pound of body weight, and or have extra calories and or extra carbohydrates, because the insulin, the higher level of insulin from extra calories and carbs will cause extra weight gain, and it will allow you to also put on more muscle. It's hard to really gain a whole bunch of muscle at the same time without putting on a little bit of extra fat weight too. Typically you have to kind of choose one. You have to kind of do a combination of the two if you want to gain muscle and size, and then on the back side of it you can cut a bit. It's hard to really be at your optimal muscle mass and weight without focusing on one side, gaining the muscle and the weight, and then on the other side, cutting and then dropping the carbs really low, and maybe even dropping the fat if you're going to be more of a fitness competitor. Dennis writes in, I heard a psychiatrist say that the Atkins diet is not recommended for people with OCD because it depletes serotonin. Is that true? That makes zero sense at all. The question I would have for that person is, what's serotonin made from? Oh, it's made from tryptophan. What's tryptophan? Oh, that's an amino acid. Where are amino acids found in the most abundant sources? Oh, animal products. So that person, it would just, that line of questioning would destroy that person's premise. Lambert writes in, and if GI map H. pylori is detected but under pathogenic limits, should it be treated and how? It depends on how much low it is. If it's a standard deviation or two, meaning 10x plus, then more than likely not. Is it normal order of operation when it comes to pathogens such as H. pylori, bacteria, and yeast? Yeah, so when we treat infections, we typically go H. pylori first, bacteria and parasites second, yeast third, but a lot of times there's a big overlap in how we treat things. Have you any experience healing cyclical vomiting syndrome? Prescribed low dose of amitriptyline to help gut-brain autonomic response, CoQ10, L-carnitine. It supports the theory that there is a mitochondria issue. So in regards to cyclical vomiting, it depends why you're vomiting. I would have to do a really good history on how all this came about. The big things I would look at is an overactive sympathetic nervous system. I'd also look at just poor digestion in general, and I'd also look at underlying infections that could be an issue. Kelly writes in, can too much soy be a culprit in goiter growth on one's thyroid? It could be. I mean, because soy is a goitrogenic compound, so it can block iodine uptake. Also, just not getting enough iodine, you don't need that much. So like I always have my patients on at least 150 to 200 micrograms in their multi, and then they should be getting a little bit of good iodine with just some fish and some egg yolks and things like that. So most people that are eating that level of a diet and have that level of a supplementation, they shouldn't be developing a goiter from low iodine. Is a Vitamix good to get the same nutrients as you would with a juicer? The Vitamix is good for breaking things down. There is a lot of fiber in the Vitamix, obviously, because it's not a juicer. The juicer strips away the fiber. So the benefit of a juicer is if you are having a hard time handling the fiber, you remove that fiber. So some people benefit from that. If your digestion's pretty good and you just want to absorb things and break it down faster because you can get a whole bunch more nutrients in 1 cup of a smoothie than you could, let's say, eating 4 cups of kale, that's the benefit. For sure. And obviously it makes it easier on your tummy to access it for sure, but there is that fiber there. Holly writes in about the VACCINES topic. Can't talk about it. I don't want YouTube and Google to censor me. Too many other important topics to talk about. Don't want to get censored. I hope you understand. Do you think it's a good idea to consult edible mushrooms, extracts, if one has a candida issue? It depends. If it's a medicinal mushroom, reishi and cordyceps and all these things are really good. I like it. If you have a candida issue, you can always hold off on it, but I don't see those issues as a big concern. And Holly, if you want to do a private message to me, feel free and do me a private message on my Facebook, and I would be happy to respond to you. Oscar writes in, Doctor, do you think ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph should eat differently? It depends. I think an ectomorph, think of this as like your basketball player, taller, leaner, etc. They definitely can handle more carbohydrates. So I do think there's going to be a shift on the macros. You're going to be able to handle a lot more carbohydrates. So then your ability to, let's say, be more insulin sensitive is greater. So you would be able to handle more carbs. People that are more mesomorph tend to be more in the middle. People that are more endomorph tend to be more insulin resistant. They do better with more keto and lower carbohydrates. That's why people that are out there that just say, well, this one diet is it. I think it's just very dogmatic because there are a lot of people that are insulin resistant and that do really well more ketogenic and lower carbohydrate. Some people, just due to their inactivity, do well keeping the carbohydrate down, because if you're not that active and you're not burning carbs for fuel when you're more sedentary, it makes sense to cut the carbs down. And some people have more insulin sensitivity. They feel great on the carbs. They can handle it. The difference is we want more whole food carb sources, not the refined processed carbs. Also staying away from the more inflammatory carbs like grains. But that's where there's that sensitivity issue. I think a lot of people, though, tend to do better keeping the carbs down because of the fact that we've been over-consuming carbohydrates and sugar for the last 100 years. So people do better in general with the lower carb. The exception are people that are already at a healthy weight, already really active, and already get really a good amount of energy from the carbs, or people that if they don't get enough carbs in their body, they lose weight. So I kind of put a couple of those modifiers or exceptions on there so you can see where you fit. Do eggs cause prostate problems in men? I would never think so. They're loaded with zinc and selenium, which are good nutrients for the prostate. Can betaine cause bloating? So hydrochloric acid, betaine HCl, most of the time HCl is going to actually help bloating because you're providing more acidity, which helps activate the enzymes in the stomach to break down protein called pepsin. And that really helps kick away that digestive process. Now, you can also make sure enzymes are in there as well, and then you can kind of taper up the enzymes as well, see how much that moves the needle. We can also look at adjusting FODMAPs and making sure things are cooked really well so it's easier on your tummy, Ashley. Sean writes in, if you are in a sympathetic nervous system for too long, it can become conditioned, meaning your brain keeps it turned on by the way of thinking. I do agree. That's why things like heart rate variability can be helpful, breathing techniques, gratitude, just using adaptogens to help kind of keep your nervous system in that state, focusing on nasal breathing. I would say things like magnesium and L-theanine, things that really activate the inhibitory neurotransmitters in your brain called GABA are very helpful. Another question, does anything happen to protein in potatoes, rice, and legumes besides the resistant starch production changes when they cook and the cooling of starches? Does the protein go down as well? In a lot of those sources, I think there would actually be a greater bioavailability. When you soak or cook a lot of these vegetarian protein sources, they actually become more bioavailable, and you also break down some of the anti-nutrients, so cooking it actually helps. People forget the reason why we had as as cavemen and cave women, Homo gaster, Cro-Magnon, these various splits off from the ape family. Part of the reason why we got to be where we're at is because we were able to eat meat. We were able to access bone marrow. We were able to eat fish, and that grew our brain immensely. Then we were able to create tools like the hand axe. The hand axe allowed us to split open long bones and get access to bone marrow. That bone marrow grew our brains even more. And then as our brains got better and more intellectual, we could create weapons like spears that allowed us to kill animals better. And then that allowed us to have better brain growth. And then we were able to create things like bow and arrow or spears, which allowed us to kill animals from a safer distance, not be attacked. And then we were able to get access to more nutrition, organ meats, and that caused our brain to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. If you talk to any, let's just say, anthropologist, someone that really studies the evolution of humankind and the nutrition that we ate over that time, it's not even controversial. I've watched many documentaries on Nova where they've even talked about this, and they were really clear. So when people have a significant bent towards vegetarianism or veganism, it's like you only can have that bent or that bias because of how we evolved eating foods that were not in alignment with that. So if you're eating foods that aren't in alignment with how we evolved, it doesn't sound like it's that sustainable, right? It's kind of a Pottinger's cat experiment where you're eating foods that really didn't get us to this point, and then now you'll probably pay a price over the next couple of generations as your diet is missing certain nutrients that you just have a harder time getting it in plant-based diets. With plant-based diets, you can supplement the extra B12, you can supplement the extra iron, you can do protein powders, you could do extra algae oils for omega-3s, but you're just trying to make up for the fact that you're missing a lot of the nutrients that you could be getting in animal products. Excellent. Thoughts on microdosing psilocybin? A lot of research coming out. I don't have a ton of Thoughts on it? I think it could be palliative. I think it may provide insight and awareness. I don't see it as fixing anything from a root cause perspective. I do think of it as a good way to provide additional insight. I think you could still do that without doing those things, but I think it provides some benefit, and I've heard some good things for sure. All right, guys, hope that's really helpful. Any questions, put your comments down below. If you enjoyed it, let me know, and I will be back soon. Oh, last question is vegetarian proteins as well. There's a lack of bioavailability in the vegetarian proteins. And we know this because plants don't have fangs to fight or teeth to bite. So they have anti-nutrients that allows their seeds or allows the seeds essentially to go out in the stool of the animal once it eats it, and then they can grow somewhere else. So it's kind of how they pass themselves on. They say, well, if we can't fight or flight or attack you, we're going to just spread our babies through your stool. And they only can do that because they have various anti-nutrients that make them hard to be digested. And so those things are going to be a stressor on you, the mammal, if you're eating a lot of them. Now, you can help by soaking them and cooking them and breaking them down and sprouting them, but that still ignores the fact that there are anti-nutrients in there that allow those things to pass on, because that's how they pass on. And so it's important to know that animals have their teeth and their fangs, but once we've killed them, there isn't a lot of anti-nutrients to them once they're cooked. Plants, on the other hand, don't have those, but they have anti-nutrients that we can help reduce, but they're still there, and they still, let's say, because of those, there's a lack of bioavailability on the protein that we don't have with the animal products, lectins, phytates, oxalates, etc. All right, hope that helps y'all. You guys have a phenomenal weekend. Comments down below, likes, thumbs up. Really appreciate it. Take care, y'all.